And he saw, when he raised his eyes, that he was back in the manor of Miss Graythorne's time, Will Stanton's time, with the paneled walls and the murmur of many voices, and one voice speaking in his ear. It was Dr. Armstrong. "Asking for you," he was saying. Mr. Stanton was standing beside him. The doctor paused and looked oddly at Will. "Are you all right, young man?" "Yes. Yes, I'm fine. Sorry, what was it you said?" "I was saying that your old tramp friend is asking for you, the seventh son," he lyrically puts it. "Though how he knew that, I can't say." "I am, though, aren't I?" Will said. "I didn't know till the other day about the little brother who died, Tom." Dr. Armstrong's eyes went a long way away for a moment. "Tom," he said. "The first baby, I remember. That was a while ago." His gaze came back. "Yes, you are. So's your father, for that matter." Will's head jerked round, and he saw his father's grin. "You were a seventh son, Dad?" "Certainly," Roger Stanton said, his round pink face reminiscent. "Half the family was killed in the last war, but there were 12 of us once. You knew that, didn't you? Proper tribe it was. Your mother loved it, being an only child herself. I dare say that's why she had all you lot. Appalling in this overpopulated age. Yes, you're the seventh son of the seventh son. We used to joke about it when you were a baby, but not later on, in case you got ideas about having second sight or whatever it is they say." "Ha ha," said Will with some effort. "Did you find out what's wrong with the old tramp, Dr. Armstrong?" To tell the truth, he has me rather confused," the doctor said. "He should have a sedative in his disturbed state, but he's got the lowest pulse rate and blood pressure I've ever come across in my life, so I don't know. There's nothing physically wrong with him, so far as I can tell. Probably he's just feeble-minded, like so many of these old wanderers. Not that you see many of them nowadays. They're nearly disappeared. Anyway, he keeps shouting to see you. Will, so if you can put up with it, I'll take you in for a moment. He's harmless enough." The walker was making a lot of noise. He stopped when he saw Will, and his eyes narrowed. His mood had clearly changed. He was confident again, the lined triangular face bright. He looked over Will's shoulder at Mr. Stanton and the doctor. "Go away," he said. Said Dr. Armstrong, and he drew Will's father with him nearer the door, within sight but out of earshot, in the small cloakroom that was serving as sick bay. One other casualty, the broken leg, lay in bed, but he appeared to be asleep. "You can't keep me here," the walker hissed. "The rider will come for me." "You were scared stiff of the rider once," Will said. "I saw you. Have you forgotten that, too?" "Ah, forget nothing," the walker said scornfully. "That fear is gone. It went when the sign left me. Let me go. Let me get out to my people." A curious, stiff formality seemed to be coming into his speech. "Your people didn't mind leaving you to die in the snow," Will said. "Anyway, I'm not keeping you here. I had you brought to the doctor. You can hardly expect him to let you out in the middle of a storm." "Then the rider will come," said the old man. His eyes glittered, and he raised his voice so that he was shrieking to everyone in the room. "The rider will come! The rider will come!" Will left him, as his father and the doctor came rapidly toward the bed. "What on earth was he all about? What on earth was all that about?" said Mr. Stanton. The walker, with the doctor bending over him, had fallen back and lapsed into angry mumbling again. "Goodness knows," said Will. "He was just talking nonsense. I think Dr. Armstrong's right. He's a bit cracked." He looked round the room, but saw no sign of Merriman. "What happened to Mr. Lyon?" "He's off somewhere," his father said vaguely. "Find the twins, would you, Will? I'll go see if the storm's dropped enough to let us out yet." Will stood in the bustling hall as people came and went with blankets and pillows, cups of tea, sandwiches from the kitchen, empty plates going back again. He felt odd, detached, as though he were suspended in the middle of this preoccupied world, and yet not part of it. He looked at the great hearth. Even the roar of the flames could not drown out the howling wind outside and the lash of icy snow against the window panes. The flames leapt, holding Will's eyes. From somewhere outside time, Merriman said into his mind, "Take care, it is true. The rider will come for him. That's why I had you bring him here, to a place strengthened by time. The rider would have come to your own house otherwise, and all that comes with the rider, too." "Will!" Miss Graythorne's imperious contralto came ringing. "Come over here." And Will looked back into the present and went to her. He saw Robin beside her chair and Paul approaching with a long, flat box of a familiar shape in his hands. "We thought we'd have a kind of concert until the wind drops," said Mrs. Graythorne briskly. "Everyone's doing a little bit. Everyone who fancies the idea, that is. A ceilidh, or whatever it is the Scots call 'em." Will looked at the happy gleam in his brother's eyes. "And Paul's going to play that old flute of yours that you like so much." The wind rose. It whipped, screeching at the window. There was a tremendous thump of a knock at the door. Across the room, the walker jumped up, his face twisted again, tight with waiting. Paul played, unhearing. The crashing knock came again. None of them could hear, Will realized suddenly, though the wind was near to deafening him. It was not for their ears, nor would they know what was happening now. The crash came a third time, and he knew that he was bound to answer. He walked alone through unheeding people to the door, took hold of the big iron circle that was the handle, muttered some words under his breath in the old speech, and flung open the door. Snow spat in at him. Sleet slashed his face. Winds whistled through the hall. Out of the darkness, the great black horse reared up high over Will's head, hooves flailing, eyes rolling white and foam flying from bared teeth, and above it gleamed the blue eyes of the rider and the flaring red of his hair. In spite of himself, Will cried out and threw up one arm instinctively in self-defense, and the black stallion screamed and fell back with the rider into the dark, and the door swung shut. And there was all at once nothing in Will's ears except the sweet lilt of the old flute as Paul played on. People sat sprawled tranquilly about just as they had before. Slowly, Will brought his arm down, still crooked defensively up over his head, and as he did, he noticed something that he had totally forgotten. On the underside of his forearm, which had been facing the black rider when he threw up his arm, was the burned-in scar of the sign of iron. In that other great hall, the first time, he had burned himself on the sign when the dark was making its first attempt on him. The lady had healed the burn. Will had forgotten it was there. "One sign of fire you have with you already." So that was what she had meant. One sign of fire had kept the dark at bay, driven it out of its strongest attack, perhaps. Will leaned limply against the wall and tried to breathe more slowly. But as he looked across the tranquil crowd listening to their music, he saw again a figure that sent all confidence crashing into nothing. And the quick instinct of Gramarye told him that he had been tricked. He had thought he was out facing a challenge, and so he was, but in so doing he had opened the door between the dark and the walker, and thus, in some way, so strengthened the walker that the old man had gained a power he had been waiting for the walker was standing tall now, his eyes bright, his head flung up, and his back straight. He held one arm high and called out in a strong, clear voice, "Come, wolf, come, hound, come, cat, come, rat, come, hild, come, holder, I call you, come in, come, tan, come, call, come, quirt, come, mora, come, master, I bring you in." The summons went on a long list of names, all familiar to Will from the Book of Gramarye. In Miss Graythorne's hall no one could see or hear. All went on as before, and through the ending of Paul's music and the loud, determined beginning of Mr. Dewhurst's monologue, no eyes that glanced in Will's direction seemed to see him. He wondered whether his father, still standing talking to the Dawsons, would shortly notice that his youngest son was not to be seen. But very soon, as the ringing summons from the walker went on, he ceased to wonder, for under his senses the hall began subtly to change. The old hall of the lady came back into his consciousness and absorbed more and more of the appearance of the present. Friends and family faded, only the walker remained clear as before, standing now at the far end of the great hall away from the fire. And while Will still stared at the group in which his father stood, even while it faded, he saw take place the doubling by which the old ones were able to move themselves in and out of time. He saw one form of Frank Dawson step easily out of the first, leaving his other self to fade as part of the present. The second form grew clearer as it came toward him, and after it, the same way came old George, young John, and the blue-eyed woman. And Will knew this had been the manner of his own arrival, too. Soon the four were grouped round him at the center of the ladies' hall, each facing outward, 4 corners of a square, and as the walker called his long summons of the dark, the hall itself began again to change. Strange lights and flames flickered along the walls, obscuring the windows and the hangings. Here and there, at the sound of of a particular name, blue fire would dart up into the air, hiss, and die down again. On each of the 3 walls facing the hearth, 3 great sinister flames shot up, which did not afterward die down, but remained dancing and curving in ominous brilliance, filling the hall with cold light. Before the hearth, in a big carved chair he had occupied from the beginning, Merriman sat motionless. There was a terrible restrained strength in his sitting. Will looked at the broad shoulders with foreboding, as he would have looked at a gigantic spring that might at any moment snap loose. The walker chanted louder, "Come Uth, come Truith, come Eru, come Loth, come Hego, come Selmis, I bring you in." Merriman stood up, a great black, white-plumed pillar. His cloak was wrapped around him. Only his carved stone face was clear, with the light blazing in his massive white hair. The walker looked at him and faltered. Thick round the hall, the fires and flames of the dark hissed and danced, all white and blue and black, with no gold or red or warm yellow in any. The 9 tallest flames stood up like menacing trees, but the walker seemed to have lost his voice again. He looked once more at Merriman and shrank back a little, and through the mixture of longing and fear in the bright eyes, suddenly Will knew him. "Hawken," Merriman said softly, "there is still time to come home."